Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have our co-host, Corinne French, and we have a special guest, actually for the second time, Creg Mixon. Creg, thanks for joining us again on the podcast.
Absolutely, glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, so this is the first podcast of 2022, right? And so last time we talked about, Happy New Year, right?
Happy New Year.
We're having a little bit of deja vu because the COVID numbers are going up, but we're not going to talk about COVID on this podcast. We're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to talk about what we're seeing right now that are influence our kids in the library. That's part of that. And then, of course, some of the influences we have out there that require grit, perseverance to get through some of the struggles we're seeing right now. For those of you all that are tuning in for the first time, Creg, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background before we jump into these topics?
Yeah, professionally, I spent the last 15 years in procurement, corporate procurement. Still in that profession. Worked for a major airline. Decided to run for school board based off my kids and other kids in our district. This is a district that I was a part of and raised up, graduated from here, and just love being able to get back and see the success of these kids. So.
Outstanding. And yeah, it's being part of the school board. I'm always impressed by it because you're working, you have a full-time job, plus you're giving back in the evenings, and sometimes those evenings turn into early mornings, from what I hear. So in addition to everything you have going on, appreciate you taking some time out of your lunch hour to join us here on the podcast. And so this topic has come up a few different times, and that's related to books in the library, not just with us, but with other school districts. And it seems like a hot topic right now. Corinne, Creg, what are y'all seeing right now as far as books in the library? I know when I was growing up, this wasn't really an issue. At least I never heard about it. But now you have all these different perspectives on things that are influencing our kids. I mean, what are y'all's thoughts?
Corinne, I'll let you go ahead and take first.
I know y'all are going to do that to me. Well, I mean, I probably have a little bit different opinion on it than maybe most. I personally think that there's probably a line that we should not cross. But I think for high schoolers, the things that are in their library, we probably shouldn't ban much what's in the high school library. I definitely think we talked a little bit before this started, being age appropriate. And when children are little, I definitely think there is a method of protection and that we need to be protecting their minds. But if children have cell phones, they know more than we do about anything and everything. And so I think the minute you tell a student, you can't have this or can't have that, I think we just have to be careful, because I think we don't want to push an agenda, but we also don't want to not let students see what's really out there. So it's a tough topic. This is why it's so politicized.
Yeah, I think definitely politicized. My perspective on this is, one, if they're picking up the book, I think first off, that's a great start in picking up a book. I will agree with you, the age appropriate, context. I think that, sticking to the TEKS and teaching these kids, basic fundamentals of the K through, 8 grades. As far as, in the high school, I'd still stick to kind of the opinion of sticking to the TEKS and not pushing certain agendas. I think it's important for public education to teach history, historical facts. It's hard to maintain what comes into the libraries, but for a board member, it's also specific to the area that you live in and the people that you represent. Here in New Caney, it's a pretty strong conservative base, and I think that our kids picking up books on their own is a good thing, but sticking to basic fundamentals of TEKS, they'll eventually form their own opinions politically. And honestly, I think that responsibility lies more at home than it does, within the public school. that they'll pick up their political opinions or whatever that may be from their homes. But leave an education to be strictly historical, and historical facts.
On that same note, students are going, it's kind of ties back to a podcast we did a couple weeks ago, and it's talking about the role of a school district, academics versus parenting versus crossing those boundaries a little bit. And I mean, right now, obviously there's some really controversial topics out there. And one thing that I'm curious about is if a student goes into a library and they pick up a book on one of these controversial topics, they're in a safe space. They feel like they are anyways. They're in a school district. This is their safe for a lot of students, especially if they have troubles at home. The school is where they go for their safe haven. And now they're going to the library, they're picking up a book. I just wonder if students are really taking a step back and thinking to themselves, okay, this is one person's opinion. This is one person's perspective. And especially when they're young and they're so malleable, and they're so easily influenced by different things. I just wonder if they pick up that book, and if it's some extreme topic or it's some morally questionable topic, if they're just going to open up and just take it all in, without a grain of salt, for lack of better words. I mean, what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Like, having the discussions, for me personally, my kids come home with, if they see something that, raises an eyebrow for them, they definitely bring it to me, and, we'll talk about it, allowing me to kind of, give them guidance on, fact, fiction, multiple sources, which the media that we have today, you have to check multiple resources, just because they've become, very one-sided themselves. So, could they? Yes, a kid that may not necessarily live in the environment, that my kids are blessed to be in, but, letting them know that there are other opinions, that it's not fact, I think is probably a direction I would like to, I would recommend, someone that is responding to a student, to check other sources and look at those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to publish sorry.
That's all right. We'll know that they'll go to Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and they take it, for its value. So I definitely think it's important that they're taught to check multiple sources and to fact check. It's all part of writing the research papers and things. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely think for small children, when they see things in print, I'm thinking even probably under third grade, they probably do see it as truth, because why would someone put something in front of someone that age without it being truth? Their minds in many ways aren't able to handle different things like that. So I think you're onto something there, Gary, like with when the books for elementary, I definitely think should be we should be very careful, because they do take it in, and that could shape their worldview. And it's not even that it would be wrong, but even like showing kids all the different kinds of fields that are out there and all the different kinds of people, that's important, right? But like if a lot of the books only show a certain face color, skin color, certain things, and we're also limiting that, there's a whole great big world out there. So I think it's tough, but I know that when my daughter brought home a series of books in middle school, I believe, it wasn't a series of books that I would have let her read normally. Like it wasn't on my shelf, and I have a pretty extensive library here at home for children. But I didn't want her to read the book series. But it was at that time where if she was in kindergarten or anything, younger, I felt like I would have had more of a say. But as a middle schooler, I did want to say, well, why do you want to read those books? And that doesn't really align with the faith that we have in our home. And like, it's not a book I would pick for you. So, I think she ended up reading the entire series, and I won't name the series because I know a lot of parents do allow their children to read that series, but it wasn't something I wanted. But I decided not to fight that battle like I would have fought it a little harder if she was younger. And I think what came out of that is I was able to have conversations with her to share with her that what you read, you internalize that. And so if you're doing some research and you need to see all different sides of something, that's one thing. But what you're pouring into you, it is important what we pour in. And so spending a lot of time, if I start reading, I knew that would happen. Sorry. I'm at home today. If I start reading about books about mechanics and I don't know anything about cars, eventually I'll start talking or using references about mechanics. It just happens. So we have to be careful, and we should talk to our students about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it kind of ties back to, I mean, not just perspectives, but I know you don't talk about faith in public schools. You're not supposed to anyways, right? But people's faith affects how they communicate with people, their perceptions on certain topics. I'm just wondering, like right now, I'm hearing a lot of things in schools that I never even thought of when I was a kid. Like, people are picking what gender they want to be. And then there's all these different variations of that. And I can't even keep up with it. But there's other things in society like that happening right now. How do school districts, and I guess this is Creg and Corinne, this is for both y'all. How do school districts determine, especially when you're not involving any type of faith or more, I don't know what the right word is, but you can't talk about faith from as far as I know in school. You're not supposed to. How do they determine the moral boundaries of certain topics in a school district?
Well, I think that the state clearly identifies TEKS and, what's to be taught, fundamentals, at each grade level, what they should be taking in. And I think that's what needs to stick to, when it comes to those situations. It is a tough, topic. And I know that no matter where people may fall, whether they are a person of faith or not, it's hard not to address that or speak about it. And I think they stick to those basics of what's in the TEKS, and then also discussing multiple other avenues and fact checking and things like that. I think it's just important.
Yeah, it is important. It as far as the fact checking and what's right, what's not right. With all this conversation around books in the library, and this is just a starting point, right? Books in a library, but it kind of morphs into other areas once you start having conversations outside of the library. But what's happening right now within school districts around these controversial topics? Is it kind of up to the board and the leadership to determine what's right and wrong related to these topics, or are there some sort of guiding principles in place? I know you mentioned TEKS, is that right? You mind explaining what that is?
TEKS is essential knowledge. Corinne, help me.
Gosh, you would get me on that.
It's basically the guidelines that each grade level, what is to be taught throughout that year, and what the kids are to come out of that grade knowing based off basics, whether it be mathematics, certain problem solving, addition, subtraction. You move into algebra, and those are their guidelines, for teachers to know what is to be taught during those each grade level.
Yeah, it stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Sorry. I think there are some abilities for local control of certain things. I think that's kind of the beauty of public schools in Texas, is we do have local control, but we also want all students in the state to be college, career, and military ready. Like, we want them to go to that next step. So we have to have something that's standard. And I know people don't like, some people don't like those words, like to say we want a standardized or this kind of learning for all students, but we have to make it the safest place for all. Like Gary, you mentioned that school could be the safest place for a student. And so you think of students who are different, and whether we like different or not, there has to be a safe space for them. We have to educate all students. And so I think there's got to be some trust in the TEA and we're big organizations, even like the State Board of Education, that we have to have some trust in the fact that they've done some of their work. I think there's we poke a lot of holes. I do it too. We poke holes in certain organizations and don't think that they're doing the best. But I think at the root of it, people wouldn't be in education. They're not in education to make money. The teachers are not there to make money. They're there because they love students. But you mentioned something earlier that I think is important. One of you mentioned this. I think it was you about your wife working in the library, and the books are bought in bundles sometimes. So you might buy this packet of the new books and there could be some in there that just aren't good. And there might be some librarians over the years that might have made a few mistakes. And it's like, that doesn't mean they're all bad. That doesn't mean all books are bad. So I think I think we have to just take a step back. And I like what you said earlier about just focusing on the basics. What do our kids need? Our kids need loved right now. They need taught, they need encouraged. And how do we get back to that and kind of let some of this other political stuff stay out in that world? Because bringing that to them is like, it's a shame on us if we're doing that. If we're politicizing even board work, then, and people are. And so I guess I want to kind of say that, like, shame on the people that are doing that, because our kids' minds and hearts are at stake. They truly are.
Creg, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, when I was growing up, you go to school to learn math, English, science, history, and you try to go to college. If you don't, you try to get a good job out of high school. I mean, that was the goal. It seemed pretty simple. And I'm just going to be honest here. I wasn't reading a lot of books in high school. I read the books they told me to read in class, and or Cliff Notes.
I had Cliff Notes, man. I don't think I read a full book in high school.
So, I mean, there's a lot of talk. It's almost like politics, community activism, controversial topics. I mean, this is what's people are talking about right now. Has there been a shift in kind of the mindset of public education over the past, I don't know, I don't want to age myself, but 30, 20, 30, 40 years, that maybe they're not as focused on going to college, getting a job. It's more about changing society a little bit?
I would agree that, things have changed. I don't necessarily know if it's from a public education standpoint. I'm not an educator. I know Corinne is, and, teachers, they go into this profession and right now it's a very difficult time to be in this profession. We see a ton of them leaving the profession, but they're in it for a reason. They have it's basically inside of them to want to teach and, watch these kids. It's not a job, I think, that, like, hey, I think I'll go teach today and, just become good at it. It's, you have to have heart to want to do it. And, the environment that we're in, it's a political environment, just what's pushed down, a lot of our, through media, social media. You and I went to school, we didn't have, and thank God, we didn't have Facebook, Twitter, we didn't have cell phones that had, cameras and videos and items like that. So the access to data today is so quick and so fast, it's just not something that we encountered. We also, we would have to go home to make a phone call to call our friend, it wasn't a text or shooting. So, it's definitely a different environment that we're in. I don't necessarily know that it's public education itself. There are, many of those that will politicize education, but, in the long run, we're still trying to get kids through the basics of reading, writing, math, science, history, and sometimes in teaching history, it's, one of my favorite subjects, history, economics, government, obviously those are strong points of mine, but it's important, even though that to teach our history isn't necessarily always a beautiful thing, but you got to teach the facts. And or else we end up repeating it. And I think it's important to continue to teach those things, but definitely a different environment, that our kids are in, and the challenges that I see my kids go through, their middle school and high school level now, definitely not something that I encountered, when I was there. So we got to teach them to have, that key word, we got to teach them to have grit themselves to be successful.
I just read an article this morning from Forbes. It said why education is about to reach a crisis of epic proportions. And Craig, you mentioned teachers leaving the field, and I work in higher ed, and people are leaving student affairs and higher ed in masses also across the state and across the nation. This one sentence in this article talked about like the self-care, like no longer can we just keep telling teachers like make sure you're taking care of yourself, like, and I'm just wondering like, what can we do as board members? I was just dreaming this morning feeling like I wish there was just a way to compensate them more, to truly honor them for their work. Because if I think people have said over the years, oh, teachers have the summers off and whatever, like no one stops being a teacher. You don't stop just because you're not in the classroom. So what can we do as a board? What can we do? Because that's what I keep thinking, like we have grit and they have grit. We want our kids to have grit, but what can we do differently as boards right now?
Yeah, compensation is definitely always, a great, great way to say thank you. I think it's the best way to say thank you. And teachers, obviously, it's a tough field. They know how much they're going to make, over a certain period of time and career. I would like to see the legislature, address, TRS and their retirement options. And you've got multiple other state organizations, whether it be TxDOT, that have much better retirement plans than educators. I think that would be a great way to say thank you and to give them opportunities to have better investment options in their retirement. I mean, TRS, it's not much to retire on, and their options are slim. That's not necessarily something from a board perspective, as individual boards, but as board members, approaching our legislators, I think that's definitely something that needs to be brought to the forefront and addressing the retirement options. And, obviously, being fiscal responsible board members to ensure that, we're able to manage the money to where we can give incentives and raises and things like that. So
that's a great idea. That sounds like something that we could put on the advocacy agenda and some of the things that we ask for in the grassroots meetings. The grassroots meetings will be coming in the next couple months. And Gary, those are meetings that TASB holds. All the directors in the state will help lead these meetings, but it's a time to hear what we can do differently and how we want to address the next session when they're. So that's a great idea. I'm going to have to make sure I mention that. At our grassroots meeting.
There's reason to stay within the field when you retirement, is going to be good. At least having the investment options. I'm not saying, huge pensions, things like that. I'm just better investment options. When they can choose to, put it into different funds and see it grow, better 401k plans. It's a large group of people throughout the state, and why they're, stuck with the TRS plans, I'm not 100% certain, but I do think it would build retention and keeping people in the field. They know that they have something to work that will pay off, in the end when they decide to retire.
That's a great question. I mean, that's great. I'm gonna make sure I put that on Region 11's, put that out there and see what kind of, where that goes with Region 11. What are some other things that you think we should be focusing on as a board member in the next year?
Each year comes with its, with different challenges. Even before we came into this COVID era, I never would have imagined or dreamed that that's what we're dealing with. And I can't necessarily see into a crystal ball as to what that may be. but, ensuring that our teachers have, and our staff, not just our teachers, our support staff and teachers have what they need, whether it be in their classrooms to make it through, these difficult times, giving them the tools and ensuring that the leadership that's in place understands, the challenges that they're going through and to be supportive in every which way that we can. I think that's what we continue to focus on, as we move forward. That's what's going to keep them here. And that's, they've got to have some sense of assurance that, the leadership that's in place understands where they're at and what they're going through. And to be, be on the campuses and be encouraging and to be present from a board's perspective. We are the oversight for the 50,000 foot view. We're not management, we're governance, but we are the leadership of the district. I think it's important that they know that we're involved and we know what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. When we started this podcast, we talked about books, and I keep thinking like the students can handle things and more than we think that the students can handle. But how do you know, in your district have a student advisory committee or council time where you are actually hearing from the students and the students' perspective? Because that's what I'm thinking. We don't at our district, at least like from my view and my role as a board president. I don't spend a lot of time hearing from the students, and that's something that I would like to know, like, what do they need? Because we know what the state says they need and whatever, but they're the ones that we've all suffered in this last year and a half. But do you have any kind of connection with students and hearing their voice? I know you have your own students that are yours in your home, but
we just recently had a student just emailed the board, and I was kind of set back. I was like, this is a great question. It was, in relation to policy, and it was a kid that was wanting to advocate for them. I was encouraged that they were reaching out and engaging, that they know who to reach out to. As far as a student advisory committee, I'm not aware that we have that in our district. I know that each individual campus will have those. And, from a board's perspective, that's where being involved, in the schools and going in and seeing like what's in place, activities, things that are going on. We have principals, that reach out and ask us to come participate, whether it be in some special event, and every opportunity that I get to do that, I do, so that I can see, with the students, their achievements and things that they're doing. Sure.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking of things that can be done that don't cost a lot of money and don't put a lot of extra pressure or burden on our already overburdened staff, right? Like, so the ideas and things I'm thinking of as we move forward in our district, and we're just now engaging in a strategic planning process that will take us pretty much like a 10 to 12 year vision, not including facilities and bonds, but just student focused. And that's one of the things that I want to know more about is what are the students, what do they think and what do they feel? Because you can hear them when they're upset or when they're wanting to change something. And kudos to that student that reached out to y'all, because that's important for people to be able to learn to do that. But I think when things aren't stressful, like we're just going to have this conversation, tell us what's going on, how can we do things better or whatever. I think we might be surprised how smart that our students are, like they're our future. And that's why we do this work, because we care about our future. But I'm just wondering if that's one thing that we can do differently as boards is, and I know some districts do have vibrant student advisory committees, but that's one thing I'm thinking of for us.
Yeah, definitely. Let me know how that works out. I'd be interested to hear that. In each individual district, I think, has different goals and great ideas, and when we're able to share those across the boards, I've got friends, multiple other districts, we chat about things, but it's always what's right for the individual district. A West Texas district versus, a suburb of, a larger city with Dallas or Houston, things like that. would be much.
Well, Craig, Corinne, I know we're running short on time here. Want to thank y'all for being on the podcast. And just before we close out, it seems like based on what we talked about is leadership is needed now more than ever. You have your students that are getting information from multiple sources, whether that's social media, the library, and they're getting it fast. And while they can learn on their own, obviously they're still young, they're still learning, they're still developing. They need somebody there to kind of help them navigate through some of the content and information that's out there. And y'all have a tough job, right? Being on the school board as those leaders. So I just want to say thank you. You both are inspiring. And Craig, just want to thank you for being on the podcast.
Enjoyed it. Always fun.
Yes, best wishes with your new year, with your personal students, and then all the students in your district where you govern. I love to use that word. I love the word governance. It's so important that we know that role, and it is National School Board Month. So thank you for serving and coming on and being our first guest during one of my favorite months.
And thank you for your service as well.
And before we close out, just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact is giving, well, it's 1.5, I was going to say millions, but now it's at $1.5 billion to public education ministry. Almost 20% of the school districts in Texas are now working with Ideal Impact. It's a way to give funding that doesn't involve the government, doesn't involve taxpayers, small districts, large districts. It really doesn't matter. So very inspiring. These are unrestricted funds that can be used for anything within a school district. And right now, in Texas anyways, there was a bond election, and I think everybody has seen it. It was the most difficult bond election in the past 10 years. And right now, different communities are really paying attention to how funding is being spent. And what Ideal Impact is doing is helping districts be good stewards of the funding they already have. And they're optimizing their systems and helping them reduce the second largest expense of a school district, with is energy. And they're putting that money back into the school district to be used for teachers. Teacher salaries is a big one. I know we talked about teachers and funding on the podcast here. So these funds can be used for higher teacher salaries, which is very common. So thank you, Ideal Impact, for sponsoring the podcast. Thank you, Craig, for being a guest on the podcast again. And thank you, of course, Corinne, our co-host on the podcast, for being on the podcast. And thank you all for tuning in.